Thank you all for being here. My name's Drew. I'm the college minister at Morrison Heights Baptist Church in Clinton, Mississippi. If you're familiar with your Mississippi geography, then which you have absolutely no reason to care about Mississippi geography. We are just west of Jackson. We work with 3 college campuses primarily, although we're praying about a 4th for the next fall. So Mississippi College is small, private, Southern Baptist. It's got about 5,000 students, 15 minutes one direction. We've got Hines Community College, which I think in their network, they have like 30-something thousand students. Hines is in the thriving metropolis of Raymond, Mississippi, where the popular activities are walk to the hibachi restaurant and walk to the Sonic. And that's literally it. So they've got about 1,400 students who live on campus there in dorms. Then 15 minutes the other direction, we've got Jackson State University, which is a historically black university in West Jackson. It's also the home of Coach Deion Sanders. Jackson State University Tigers, they have gone, like since Deion came, they have gone from like great band, not a great football team, to like great band and incredible football team. So that's been a pretty exciting thing for us as we're doing ministry on that campus. And Lord willing, we're going to launch ministry on the new campus in the fall. A little bit about me. My wife and I have been married. Her name's Christy for 8 years. We have 2 boys, 5 and 2, and then we have a girl on the way in July. So there's a lot happening in our lives that we're really excited about. I've been on staff at my church for 2022, 11 years now. I've been the college minister for 8 of those. Before that, I started attending my church when I was a sophomore at Mississippi College in 2005, when a friend of mine said they just launched a college worship service at this church. And a friend of mine played. I actually went to the first worship service they had, and afterwards he came up and he's like, "Hey, Drew, you play bass, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Man," he just played for the worship band. He's like, "Man, this was really fun and all, but I'm Presbyterian. I don't really want to go to church here. Do you want to play?" And I'm like, "Sure." And like, that was pretty much it. I've just like never left the church. I'm that guy in your ministry that just never left. That's me. So real quick, this session is starting your leadership team. How many of you right now have no leadership team? Just curious. Are you like leaders sitting here and you're like, "Yeah, we didn't." How many of you do have a leadership team already? Okay, how many of you are like, "I don't really know if I have one or not"? Any of y'all in that boat? Okay. The first session, it was mostly people without leadership team. When I said, "How many of you have a leadership team?" A few people were like, "Eh." Okay, so we're gonna, in this session, talk about some, hey, what does it mean to have an effective leadership team? No matter where you are in the process, I hope it will be helpful. So here's where I want to start. I think a lot of us, when we think about this question of how do I start a leadership team, we're really burdened by this idea of like, man, it would be really great if I had someone that could help me do all of this stuff. Like I'm wiped out and I just want someone to jump in and help me. Let me affirm, that is a legit great thing to want. But here's what I want to tell you. I think an effective leadership team begins by first making the commitment to discipleship. So as you're thinking about launching your leadership team, know that however you start this process, it needs to begin by first committing to discipleship. We're going to break down that statement and the ideas behind that statement as we go. But what I'm going to do is, and I'll give them to you all, you don't have to write them all down now. We're talking about 3 things. First is look to Jesus, then understand leadership development, and then finally we'll talk about some practical steps to take. All right, so first, starting the leadership team, we need to start by looking to Jesus. Because when we look at Jesus, like Jesus had a leadership team, right? He had these 12 men who went with him. So we can look to him as our example as we're thinking about starting a leadership team. Now, as we look at Jesus and what motivated his leadership team, understand that Jesus' goal with his investment into his leadership team was multiplication, not accomplishing tasks. His end goal is multiplication, not accomplishing tasks. Now, his leaders did accomplish tasks for him. They helped him do the work, but they did that for a greater purpose. Jesus knew that he would leave and go to heaven, but they were going to stay. He prepared them to lead the movement that the coming Holy Spirit would inaugurate on the day of Pentecost, right? Like I love in the book of John when Jesus looks at his disciples and he's telling them, hey, I'm gonna die and rise from the dead, and then I'm gonna leave. And they're like, Jesus, you can't leave. And he says, no. It's for your good that I go, for unless I go, the helper's gonna come to you when I leave. And if I'm Jesus' disciples at that moment, I'm like, Jesus, it's way better if you're here. But he tells him, no, it's better if I go because I'm going to send a helper. And so he has this over-the-horizon kingdom view that's leading the way he builds his discipleship team. And it's that over-the-horizon kingdom view that motivates everything he does. Yes, he asked the 12 to help him accomplish tasks. Like think about when he feeds the 5,000. Hey, I want you to take this basket full of fishes and loaves and distribute it to the crowd. They helped with tasks, but the purpose was he wanted them to get something to his over-the-horizon kingdom view. Hey, your task is serving. I've got everything you need. So he's always got that view. So even if your college ministry is just starting out and you've only got even just a couple people, I want you to have the same over-the-horizon kind of view that Jesus has. That through discipleship and leadership development, you can not just get help with the tasks, but you can begin a process of kingdom multiplication that's based on discipleship. Here's what Jesus did. He invited these 12 men into his life as he challenged them to follow his teachings. He invited them into his life as he challenged them to follow his teachings. I think this is a truth that discipleship is accelerated when people have access to a life that they want to imitate. You hear that? Discipleship is accelerated when I have access to the life of someone I want to imitate. Jesus spent most of his time with his leadership team as they learned from him. They weren't just hearing his teachings, they were seeing him as he lived it out in the ins and outs of daily life. They said, I don't know everything that this Jesus guy has said, but I look at him and I want some of that. And when we have men or women gathered around us and they see something in us that they want to imitate, as they have access to our lives, that's going to begin to accelerate their discipleship process. And Jesus began his leadership team with the invitation to discipleship. Right? It wasn't like, hey, I want you to come and help me do all this stuff. He looks at, each one of the 12 and he just looks at them and is like, hey, follow me. Whatever it was they had, they just drop it and start following it. Well, for us, as you're thinking about your leadership team, know that the invitation is going to begin with an invitation to discipleship. And Jesus does that because his goal was multiplication, not just accomplishing tasks. So to go back to what I said at the beginning, your leadership team needs to be, I'm convinced, first about discipleship, second about being a leadership team. And if you get that right, I think all the details just kind of have a way of falling into place in a lot of ways. One of the biggest struggles I had to overcome in ministry was to stop seeing my leadership team as a group of people who got jobs done for me and start seeing them as the first place where I invest my time. And I love one of the signs in here. It says, the mission is people, right? That's exactly the idea. But how do you do that? How do you make disciples who can make disciples? How do you make leaders who can make leaders? I want to show you a simple tool that we use in our ministry to help you understand the process of discipleship and leadership development. I think it just describes the process that people go through. It's the leadership square. We got it from the book Building a Discipling Culture by Mike Breen. And then we'll end with some steps that you can take and then a Q&A time. So leadership square looks exactly like a regular square. So you can just, on your piece of paper, draw out the square. We're going to turn in your Bibles to Mark 10, verse 35. Mark 10:35. It says, and James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." I just love that question, like the hubris of it, right? That they're just like, "All right, Jesus, we're going to ask you something. Just go ahead and tell us yes." By the way, like this is the kind of statements in the Bible that convince me the Bible is true, because ain't no way James and John are going to like put this in the Bible unless it actually happened, right? So they come to him, "Jesus, we want you to do whatever we ask for you." And he said to them, verse 36, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." So they come to Jesus and they ask him, like, "Jesus, when you're in your glory, when you're the king, when you're everything you're supposed to be, we want to have the positions of power next to you." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentile lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." I love what's happening in this passage, just how James and John do not get it. And this is, I think, really critical. So when you're looking at your students, at your leaders, you need to understand that they're going to go through a process to become leaders. And the first stage of the follower, the discipleship, the leadership development phase, the first step is what we call a D1 disciple. D1 disciples are unconsciously incompetent. They're unconsciously incompetent. This moment where James and John ask this thing, and Jesus looks at him and he goes, "You don't even understand what you are asking me. You have no idea." And this is the first step when students come into our ministry. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know how incompetent they are at following Jesus and at leadership. They're here and they're excited. Now, praise God for that. That's where we want them. Right? Like, we don't want people showing up just already being depressed about our ministry. We'll get to that later, right? But at the beginning, we want them to be excited. And they're unconsciously incompetent. We say that they have high confidence and low competence. Low competence. They're showing up. I have these students all the time. Like, I have a freshman guy. He's like 1 month into school, and he'll come and be like, "Hey, Drew, I want to meet up and grab coffee." "Cool, let's go." So we go, and he's like, "Man, whatever you want me to do, whatever you like, I want to do it." And I'm like, "Dude, here's what I want you to do. I want you to meet one-on-one with this guy, or meet in a group of 3 or 4 every week. And I want you to like find time with the Word every day. And I'd love to have you share the gospel with someone this semester." I'm like, yeah. Okay. Now they're going to start doing that, and what are they going to find? That's hard, right? But for these D1 disciples, we need to act as an L1 leader for them. An L1 leader. The L1 leader is a director. Basically, for D1 disciples, you're just telling them what to do. Hey, you go do this, you go do this. But because they're excited, they'll say yes. They don't typically even need much of a why at this stage in the growth process. Directors say, "I do, you help." So these are like one great example of this is if you have someone who's trying to learn how to share the gospel, you may say like, "Hey, you're excited to be here. I know you don't probably know how to really share the gospel. I've got a meeting set up later today. Why don't you come with me?" Sorry, it's "I do, you watch," not "I do, you help." I got off my notes. "I do, you watch." Why don't you just come and see how I do this? And then afterwards, we'll talk and you can ask me some questions. So the L1 leader is primarily doing the work while the D1 follower is watching what is being done. They're beginning to pick up on some things. Now, when we look at Jesus in the Gospels and we look at his disciples, Jesus' goal seems to be to push people out of this stage as quickly as he can. And he's trying to push them out of this unconsciously incompetent phase to be a D2 disciple. A D2 disciple. This is where your disciple, your follower, starts to learn how hard things are. And they become consciously incompetent. They become consciously incompetent. I have to imagine that as Jesus sat his disciples down for this conversation, like these two come to him, they're like, hey, Jesus, we know you're going to be king, and we want to be right there with you. And then the other 10 are like, you can't just act, like we all deserve a shot at that. And then Jesus pulls them aside and says, hey, actually, if you want status in the kingdom, it's by making yourself the least in the kingdom. And that's a moment that just kind of like stops you and floors you, and you realize, this thing isn't what I thought it was. The reality is that every single one of us as believers need to hit that point. It's pretty much, you can think of a point in your walk with Christ where you were like, oh, I suddenly realized everything I did not understand or know how to do. We've got to get there. We say that D2 disciples are low in confidence and low in competence. Low in confidence. And what happens when you realize you are incompetent at your task is your confidence crashes. Now, as the L2 leader, like for your followers who are in D2, you need to be an L2 leader. And the L2 leader operates as a coach. And the coach says, and this is where I jumped ahead of myself earlier, I do, you help. I do, you help. Because they lack confidence, they've already seen you do it. They're beginning to think, oh, I could never do what Drew does. And so as you're sharing the gospel, you would bring them with you and say, hey, this time I would like for you to just share a little bit of your story. So as I'm sharing the gospel, you're going to come in and you're going to help me do this, right? Because what that does is it gives them a confidence booster. Oh, I can actually start to do this. And here's what I'll tell you. D2 is where your leaders, your disciples, your followers, this is where they're going to want to quit. This is where they're going to want to give it up, fold it in. They will say, I cannot do this. And your goal as a leader is to not let them quit. Because if they can get through D2, as you're going to see, they're going to get all the way home to being a leader who can make more leaders. But if you let them quit here, here's what will happen, because I've seen it happen time and time again in my ministry, is they're going to step off of your leadership team. They're going to kind of attend church for a couple months. Then they're going to leave your church. They're going to stop going to church for X amount of time. Then they're going to look around and be like, man, I think I need to be back in church. They're going to go to another church where they're going to once again become a D1 disciple. They're going to be all excited. Then they're going to jump in, try to be a leader, and they're going to enter this cycling process where their maximum leadership capacity will be handing out volunteers and shaking hands as people come into a worship service. And that we need those people. Don't hear me wrong, but that's not where we want our people to stop, because the Great Commission asks for more. Make disciples of all nations. So your job as an L2 leader is don't let them quit as much as it depends on you. So for your D2 disciple, you need to do 3 things. The first is you need to encourage them. Just find at least one thing that they do good. Bro, the way you show up for stuff, it just encourages me so much. You just keep on showing up. Like no matter how small it is, find a way to encourage them. Second, give them your time. Sometimes something as simple as just sitting down to coffee for an hour and just talking about life will give your D2 disciples a boost. And then finally, give them hope. Give them hope. Say, hey man, I was there once. Here's what was going on. And here's what the Lord taught me in that moment. In other words, you're telling them like, I've been there before and the Lord brought me through it. He's going to do the same thing for you. You're giving them hope. Now, I'll warn you what can happen in D2 is that they can fall into what we have affectionately called the D2 pit, right? Like they crash off the D2 cliff and they land down here in the pit. And then when they get down here in the pit, they have what we like to call a pity party. Always kills. It always kills. But in the pit, there's like tar, right? And it can kind of keep you trapped down here because what's happening is sometimes they begin to look at their follower and they say like, well, Drew can do all this. Like Drew's so whatever. And he can, I'm never going to be able to do this. And the leader, the potential leader can become codependent on the person they're following. And sometimes they can even come down here and like build furniture and this is just where they want to live. Like I can never be that. I can never lead. I can never disciple someone else. And what they'll start to want to do is they'll want you to come down into the pit with them. And I've seen this happen, right? You'll be like, man, I thought I was a good disciple maker, but like this person just can't seem to get it. I have 2 residents on my staff who they're fantastic leaders, and they're tomorrow leaving to go out of the country. They've got 4 freshmen with them. And we've been doing a week of like discipleship intensive and mission stuff that they've been leading. And they called me Tuesday night and they said, hey, all 4 of these girls are complaining about how tired they are and how they feel burnt out and they don't feel like we're giving them enough time to rest. These are my residents talking to me. Like, we don't know, like, what do we do? And, we kind of talked through some ideas and I could sense in the conversation, I just stopped and like, hey guys, y'all know where they are, right? These girls are in D2. And immediately, like, a light bulb went on for them. They're like, oh. And I needed to remind my leaders in that moment that just because their followers were in D2 and discouraged and ready to quit, it wasn't a reflection on them as a leader. Like, hear me say that. When your people get to D2, it's not a reflection on you as a leader. This is inevitable. They need to go through this. You just have a different task for you as their leader now, which is to coach them. What you need to do is you need to basically show them the ladder. You don't get down here and try to push them out of the pit. You're giving them the steps they need to take. Like, hey, how's your time with the Lord been? Oh man, I've just been really busy. I haven't had any time. Like, hey, let's start there this week. I want you to just find like 10 minutes a day to spend some time with the Lord. Let's try that and meet up next week and talk about it. What you're doing is you're basically saying like, hey, you see that rung right there? Like, just put your hand on it. Yeah, okay, good. Now, get a foot up. All right, we're going to get you out of this. And as they've done it once, when it happens to them again in the future, they're going to already have a sense of how to get out on their own because you've showed them how to do it. So we need to help our people get out of the pit. And the key statement that followers need to get to go out of D2 is they need to know the truth of this statement. God is in control. God is in control. And the reason by the way, some of you are like, man, he keeps drawing all this stuff and I'm totally messed up my page now. Sorry, my students hate it when I do this kind of like erase. So if you're like super OCD about that kind of stuff, I'm apologizing, but I'm not going to change who I am. So God is in control. This is so critical because like 99% of the time, the student in D2, the reason they are there is because they are leaning fully on themselves and their own ability. And they need this period of struggle to be in a place where they realize it's God, not me, that makes stuff happen. And you need them to get that. And so the moment they can say this with full confidence is the moment all right, I think they've entered D3. I think they've entered D3. D3 are consciously competent. Consciously competent. They have growing confidence and competence. Growing confidence. So they're beginning to do some things and they're like, oh, I did that and like the world didn't blow up. And they're like, maybe I could do this. And here's the thing, if you can get them here, they will make it all the way home. They're gonna go all the way. This is where information process is really beginning to happen. They're connecting dots. You, as an L3 leader, leading your D3 follower, you will act as a consultant. You will act as a consultant. Consultants say this: you do, and I help. You do, I help. So this is where they're probably going to come to you. They're like, oh, what Drew said, we can do missional communities this way, but like, I wonder if I did this thing over here, and they're going to come to you with that idea that's a little crazy, and you're going to hear it, and you're going to be like, man, I've been doing college ministry 11 years. I know, ain't no way that's going to work. Right, but here's what you're going to do. You're going to like kind of say like, okay, well, what do you think about this? And like, yeah, no. I really think it'll work. And you're going to probably look at them, and you're going to say, all right, bro, go for it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to, a week later, pull them in and follow up with them. Say, hey, how'd it go? Tell me about it. And you kind of are starting to give them some space to lead and fail. But here's the thing. You need to continue to act as that consultant, helping them fix things. Because if they fail and you're not there to kind of talk them through what happened, what they can do is they can go back to D2. Or they could go back and fall into the pit. But if you are there and remind them like, man, failure's normal. You know, I was talking with a buddy of mine, thinking through this talk, and I said, hey, what's some of your struggles? And he said, Aaron Barnes, buddy of ours, he said, man, most of our leaders have never failed. Someone's always been there to either do things for them or catch them. And here I am asking them to do these things that they're fully responsible, and for a lot of them, it's the first time they've ever failed in their lives. And they need you to walk them through it and to understand, like, this is just ministry. Sometimes you do stuff and it doesn't work, and that's okay. We can accept that Jesus still loves us and also never do that thing again, right? Both of those things can be true. I'm glad, like, when we went through fall of 2020, I looked at my leaders and I'm like, y'all, I'm in a ton of college ministry, Facebook groups, conferences, everything. None of the people know what they're doing right now. So I want y'all to just go do stuff. And if it fails, that's cool, because we're pretty much all failing right now. And maybe one of y'all will knock it out of the park. And some of them did. So we want our students to get that, but they need you there to walk them through it, because we all know what it feels like to fail, right? So D3, we want to be a L3 leader, consultant, let them run with ideas, give them feedback. And as they grow, eventually they become D4 followers. D4 followers. This is where they become unconsciously competent. They know how to do things without even realizing they know how to do it. I always kind of liken it. My 5-year-old got all of my wife and I's sports ability, which is to say he has no future in sports. I tried to teach him how to hit a baseball, and he has to think about every single thing he does. My hope and prayer is that the more he practices, like, you know, a high school athlete, he doesn't have to think about how to swing a bat. Versus with my 5-year-old, I'm like, every time, I'm like, buddy, switch your hands around. Like every single time. But the more you do something, the more it becomes natural to you. And when you're a D4 follower, it's the kind of things like when you think about doing ministry at this point in your ministry career, there's some things you know how to do without even really having to think about it. It's just intuitive for you. It comes out of you because you've done it so much. Well, that's the reality of our D4 followers. And D4 followers need L4 leaders. By the way, this is a high confidence and high competence. And again, when I say high confidence, this isn't like a cocky or arrogant thing, right? Because their confidence comes from this phrase: God is in control. I'm not worried. I'm not worried about doing something that's going to like make everything fall apart, because God is in control, not me. So L4 leaders are cheerleaders. And cheerleaders say, you do, I celebrate. You do, I celebrate. So this is really a goodbye phase. It's a bit of an ascending phase. Hey, I'm releasing you now to do for others as an L1, L2 leader that I did for you. So for your followers, it may look like, hey, we've been meeting every week, but like now, like I'm going to release you to go do it, but we're still going to meet up. Like once a month, let's all gather for dinner and talk about what the Lord's doing. So there's a little bit of an ascending phase here. Also, you're going to lift up these leaders to those who need someone to lead them, right? So by the way, this whole process, I think generally takes about a year to walk through with someone. Sometimes it's a little faster. Sometimes it's, I just always remind people like, y'all, Jesus had his disciples for 3 years and he died and they thought it was all over. They still didn't get it after 3 years. I look at my leaders, I'm like, it's okay that your people don't get it in 2 months. It's going to take some time. So your L4 leaders, your D4 followers, they're going to come up here and they're going to be L1 leaders. But sometimes I'll have, that freshman guy that wants to meet with me and grab coffee, and he'll be like, hey, Drew, I really want you to mentor me. I'm like, cool, that's a really good thing. Tell you what, I don't have a lot of space in my schedule right now, but I've got Dylan. And I've been investing in Dylan for the last 2 years, and he's an amazing guy. And he's looking for some guys to invest in, and I think you two would hit it off. I'm going to connect you two, right? Because what I'm doing is you're going to do this, and I'm going to celebrate, and I'm going to be lifting these people up. So real quick, we are going to pause here. What questions do you have for me about the leadership square? Yes, sir.
How do you pour into the leaders in this cycle?
Yeah, so like practically, what does this look like? Is that kind of what you're asking?
For older students involved in the ministry, or just just people that are involved in discipling those in that process.
Yeah, so I think if I understand your question, I would pull us back to what we talked about, and we're looking for how did Jesus do this? It was that life-on-life investment. If you're going to move people around the square, it's got to look like that. I'm convinced. So that invitation and challenge, that I can max out at about 6 or 7 guys that I'm taking through the square in a year, personally. That I can do that kind of investment, where I'm inviting them into a relationship with me, I'm giving them access to my life, and I have a structured, formal meeting time where I'm meeting with them once a week to help them process and grow, right? It's that commitment to discipleship as I'm pushing them and challenging them, right? Like, so I may see their D1 and I'm going to try to give them some tasks that I know will stretch them outside of what they are able to do on their own power, that will push them out of their comfort zone so that they can hit D2 and then we can really get somewhere. But I think it has to be that invitational life. You have to have that space somehow in your ministry for that to happen. It's really hard to do. I would say it's not really hard. It's almost impossible to do this from a stage.
So when they're at the D2 phase and you said they go into the pit, when do you give up, or do you ever?
The only way I give up is if they shut me down, and that happens. There are some people who, I had a guy last year. I was not directly discipling him. One of my staff was. And he texted me like, hey, I've got a lot of stuff going on, and he stepped off leadership team. And I knew he had some struggles because I'm the college minister, right? So I texted him like, hey man, I'd really like to meet with you. I want to listen. He said, no thanks. But I can't do anything else then. So that's pretty much it for me.
How large is your leadership team?
Yeah, we have around 40 leaders now.
So how do you because that's about our leadership team, how do you effectively do that with the amount of people, I guess? I really like the process, but I'm just in my mind gosh, that's a lot of people to lead through this whole process.
Yeah. Well, the only answer is you need people who have the capacity to lead at L4, right? So you have to constantly be bringing people behind you and getting them to D4. And then you're giving them leadership reps. Because we as leaders have to be competent at all these forms of leadership. And there's a little bit of like, if you follow someone and you get to D4 in following them, and then you're like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to try to be an L1 leader. You kind of have to go through the whole square again just as a leader. And it's a little like weird to think about it that way, but that's really how it works. So you're just giving people leadership reps and they're growing. But it's Scott Kindig, one of my favorite quotes from him is he told us one time, when your vision outpaces your leadership, you need to slow down and make more leaders. And so if you're looking like, I've got this huge ministry, there's no way I could do this on a big scale. Okay, you have one task now, and that is to make more leaders. It's to get more people all the way around the square. The problem is, I just told you this process takes about a year. It's okay. It's okay. You know what you need to do, and you're just going to do it. The first year we started our discipleship huddles, I was convinced that we would double the number of huddles in one semester. And we went from 12 huddles to 14 huddles. We added 2 huddles. And I was like in a funk, right? Man, like I totally failed in my plan. So I called Scott and I was like, man, this is where we are. Like, I feel like I really botched it. And he was like, no, that's about right. Most people, this takes a year before they're ready to lead. And he was like, honestly, sometimes it takes even longer. Like, we found that people who grew up in church, it takes about twice as long to get them around here as people who got saved like in high school or in college. Because as someone who grew up in church, I had to unlearn a lot before I was ready to make disciples. Yeah.
Do you do like 1-on-2 or 1-on-3 discipleship meetings as far as like what does, well, okay, so in 2 parts. One, do you meet up 1-on-2 or 1-on-3? And also when you do meet up with people, what does that time look like?
Yeah, so we do discipleship huddles. That's typically 3 to 6 people. And then I'll do one-on-one meetings following up as need arises. So if I'm talking with one of my guys in huddle and I just kind of know now, like I've got this is my 5th time leading a huddle. I've got a little bit of unconscious competence built up. I can just hear them say something. And I'm like, I know we need to schedule a coffee date this week and we need to figure some stuff out. So for me, one-on-one is more as needed because we can deal with a lot in a short amount of time in huddle. Yeah.
This might there might be an answer already to this question, but do you get like burnout at all in like D3, D4? Is it that only like consistent in like D2?
I think it happens more in D2. I think if a D3, D4 follower is burning out, it's probably because, this is on me, I stepped back too much and wasn't there for them when they were struggling and needed me. That's one of my personal, I think, weaknesses and one way I've felt in ministry. Because if I step back too much and I'm not there for them when they fail, they will, by burnout, really they're saying I'm back in D2. But what we found is if you're inviting people into relationship with you like Jesus does, that's such a life-giving thing. And one thing that's key to our discipleship process is rest and work. We want them to get, hey, what does it look like to work well, which a lot of our students are bad at, and what does it look like to rest well, which a lot of our students are also. And what the incredible thing is when they're bad at both working and resting, we're like, man, we just need to rip up everything and start from scratch with you. So we build that in because unless you can both work and rest well, you can't sustain ministry over the long haul. So we want to make sure they get that. But yeah, primarily, I think if you're hearing burnout, that's a sign that someone's either sliding back into D2, they're trying to do too much on their own power, and they're not believing this statement. Yeah. Or this is just where they got to, and that's how they're describing it. Yeah, that's a great question. So let's do this. I want to talk about some of the practical steps if you are beginning your leadership team. So I've got 8 steps, but they're all very quick. Step 1 is you need to establish the vision. What are you calling these leaders to? Establish the vision. What is it your ministry will be about? And I'm not saying you need a clear, 5-year roadmap to the future, but you need to know the things that are important to you and your ministry, and you need to be able to communicate it to your leaders. One thing, just a word of advice, make your vision bigger than a worship gathering. Make it bigger than a worship gathering. Because if your vision is capped at worship gathering, what's going to happen is your leadership capacity, again, will be, I have a service role at that worship gathering, not I am a disciple who can make disciples. So I kind of want to give you that challenge there. That was something else Aaron and I chatted about as we were processing this question that I thought he shared that was really good. So step 1, establish the vision. Step 2, you need to decide who to invite. And this is a personal decision for you. If you're running a really small ministry and you've just got 3 believers who are showing up, they're probably your leadership team, right? And that's good. Generally, though, I think you're looking for people, this is just classic, who are faithful, available, and teachable, right? Faithful, available, teachable. I've found that I can go a lot further with faithful and available and teachable. I can go a lot further with that person than I can with the rock star leader on campus, because that leader is so overcommitted, they can't do what they need to do. So I don't care how big of a leader you are on campus. If you're showing up and you're willing to do whatever you think I need to do, then hey, we can go. Step 3, communicate the vision. You need to communicate the vision to your potential leaders. I really recommend sitting down with each potential individual leader, assuming that's a small number. If you've got a large number of leaders, maybe you're working with some other staff on that. Sitting down one-on-one and just talk ministry with them. Talk vision with them and let them speak into the process. So when I first became college minister, I had to reboot my leadership team. And I sat down with every leader, some who had been with the previous college minister, some who had no experience in leadership, and I asked them 3 questions. First, I said, why are you at Morrison Heights? What is it about our church that drew you in? Second, I said, have you seen God move in our college ministry? What would you celebrate? And then third, I said, what would you change if you could? What do you wish we would do differently? And I always say, hey, you're not going to hurt my feelings. At that point, I'm I haven't even really been in charge, so you can say whatever you want. And those are the 3 questions I still ask all of my leaders. So before I communicate the vision, I like to just enter a posture of listening to where my leaders are and what they've experienced, because it helps inform the vision conversation we're about to have. So after you listen for a while, then to just begin talking ministry vision, hey, where do you want this thing to go? And to get their feedback on that as you're sharing. It's going to help you know who should be on your team and who shouldn't. Step 4. So step 3, communicate the vision. Step 4, make the ask. Make the ask. So invite them to join your leadership team, but give clear expectations. Whatever your expectations are, give them at the outset. Or one thing I tell all my leaders is, hey, I expect you to be at our leadership time every Sunday night from 7:30 to 9. And no, I don't give skips for that time, so don't ask me. So if that's your expectation, you need to communicate it. If the previous college minister, he would say, hey, we meet at this time, you get 3 skips, because he was not as grumpy about all that as I am. So let them know how much time you think it's going to take. Tell them anything you're requiring them to be at. Then ask them, hey, I want you to just take a couple of days and pray about this, and then I'll follow up. But also, as you ask for their expectations, right, you're asking them for a commitment that they're going to make to you. You also need to communicate to them what you're going to commit to doing for them. Right? What investment are you planning to make into them? If they're investing this time in the ministry, how are you going to invest in them? So it's hey, I don't just want you to be on my leadership team. I actually want to spend the next year discipling you as you're leading in our ministry. And then at the end of that year, I want to see you make disciples of someone. So they know what they're getting into at the outset. And multiplication starts day 1 when you tell them where they're headed. Also, with the invitation, I personally really like to give my students an easy out. I will say, hey, Here's everything I expect. This is what I'm going to do for you. If you don't have the time to commit to this right now, know that that's totally okay with me. We can invite you again next year. I'd rather them jump out at the beginning than I would have them jump out halfway through. So I want them to go ahead and count the cost before they commit to doing it. Step 5, formalize the process. Formalize the process. There's a lot of flexibility here. What I mean is you need to decide how formal your leadership team will be. There's some guys I know who do a leadership covenant. Do y'all do leadership covenant, Jared? Yeah, we don't either. But actually, one of my guys on staff, the guys in his huddle, he has them do a leadership covenant. And so we have 4 leaders who do leadership covenant. No one else on our leadership team does one. But he really likes it. It's just not my style. So really the questions you're asking is, how will you recognize your leaders? Or will you recognize them at all? Or will it just be more of an organic thing? To what degree are they official? So however you land, there's a lot of flexibility here. Then step 6, meet. That's MEET. Although if you want to have meet while you meet, that's cool too. If it's steak and lead team, sounds pretty awesome. You'll grow your lead team really fast if you do that. How often is up to you. I prefer meeting weekly with my leaders. I want to see them every week for at least an hour. But the reason we do that is because I tell my leaders that time is where we invest in you. We have our leaders in discipleship huddles for an hour and 15 minutes, 3 out of 4 weeks. And I just tell them, I think this time is too valuable. I think it's going to be life-giving for you so you can sustain. We're going to shepherd you to make sure you're spiritually where you need to be to lead God's people. So that's why we do it every week. What I would say is keep your meeting time short and your discipleship time long. So whatever meeting time you have, keep the business short, but discipleship, like really lean into that, because that's where you're going to get a lot of capital there. Step 7, celebrate success and coach them through failure. Celebrate success, coach them through failure, because they're going to fail. They're going to fail. Step 8, evaluate and improve. Evaluate and improve. Pretty sure my leadership team has looked a little different every year I've done college ministry. And we're actually about to change a lot of things. Don't even know what yet. Don't ask me, because we haven't decided yet. Some of you are like, Drew, it's like middle of May. I know. My staff really keeps letting me know. But what we are doing, we have just outgrown. We can't deal with 40 leaders. So we have to make some changes somehow. All right. Oh, final thing on that. Invite your leaders. Whatever evaluation process you use, invite them into it. Listen to them, because they're going to help you put your finger on the pulse of what they could be missing. We use the 4 helpful list. Do any of y'all use 4 helpful lists? We just ask them, all right, what's working? We make a list. What's not working? What's missing? What's confusing? And then I let them share, and I shut up for like 30 minutes and just put it all on the board. All right, what questions do you have for me?
What's a healthy size in your opinion? Leadership team?
12 feels like the safe answer. I will say, I think for me, the most fun I've had in a leadership team has been leading 12. Now, right now we're at 40. It's no longer a team. And so what we're kind of trying to struggle through is we do missional community model. And what I desire is, rather than having one leadership team, we have 10 missional communities, right? So what I want to have now is 10 leadership teams, where I've got some people who have the capacity of an L4 leader, if not 2 or 3, that are at the top of each one of their missional communities, and they know how to bring people around this square. We're not there yet, but that's where I want to be. So what that'll probably look like is, now I have 12 people who can do what I did when I stepped into the college ministry 8 years ago. Like I'm looking at some of my senior guys, and I'm like, you're just as competent as I was when Morrison Heights Baptist Church hired me 7 years ago. I'm not saying that's a high bar, but you were there. You were there, right? And so I want to. That's what we're really trying to figure out is somehow we're going to build out some kind of coaching to help these men and women lead at that capacity. Because we have some people who have the capacity, they could lead 20-person groups to even bring people through the square and huddle. We just haven't quite figured that out yet.
So, coming from a church side of leading, having a leadership team, do you bring some adults into that mix as well?
Yes, that's something we could do better, just being transparent. So I guess I'll say this because we're recording. How do we bring adults into that? I have some recent college graduates who came through our process of discipleship and mission. They are instrumental. We also do some Sunday. So the way we really try to connect adults with our college students is through organic means, because a lot of what we're doing feels really different than what a lot of our church does. And there's pluses and minuses to that. So what I really like to do is to put our college student missional communities or community groups in the homes of our adults, because that lets them get access to the lives of the adults in a way that's really organic. I just sat in Austin Wadlow's session a moment ago, and he talked about how sometimes with adult leaders, like if you let them lead your students, a lot of our adults in church haven't even been discipled. And so that's kind of where I think our tension is. So we have some really great adult leaders in our ministry who have been. But we're trying to grow in that area. I would like to see more missional communities be in our adults' homes, because some of our we have some amazing college student leaders who still make bad decisions. And I think just having an adult voice is going to help a lot. Y'all know how it goes. Sorry for any college students here in the room. Y'all know how it goes too. I'm not saying anything surprising to y'all either. Other questions?
I kind of have one.
Yeah.
How do you, in your eyes, how do you know when you can when they're coming around the corner to D4, when you can take that step back and let them kind of have reign, not entire reign, but really give you more opportunity and just handling it on their own versus you being right there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I've ever been forced to put that into words before. You don't know. I don't know if this actually happens in nature, but this is how I imagine it. A mother bird's got the little fledglings or whatever in the nests, and then they just push them out. And if they fly, they were ready. And if not, they were not ready. There's a little bit of that. I grew up homeschooled, and there was a homeschool family in the area I grew up. They had 9 kids, and they lived out on all this land with the pond. I remember the dad telling me, all their kids did swim team. And someone asked the dad, how do you know when they're ready to swim? And he was like, we just throw them into the water, and if they swim, they're ready. And if they don't, they're not. I'm like, all right, bro, I don't know about that. But there's a little bit of that. But again, that's why it's so important that you've done this coaching and this consultant thing, because they're going to do it and they're going to come back when they fail. But eventually they're going to go do something, and then they're not going to come back. And you ask them, man, how's that been going? They're it's been going awesome. And you never stop touching base with them. But they'll kind of let you know if they're struggling, if you are opening the door to conversation. But yeah, you don't know until they're doing it, for sure. Ethan.
So you got a college student around the corner. They're at D4, and they know they're at D4. How do you keep a D4 student humble instead of just blossoming with arrogance and pride? That's what made it. If that makes sense.
How do you keep a D4 leader humble?
Yeah.
Other than making fun of them publicly, because
Yeah.
I'm afraid to admit that that's my go-to. Man, that's a good question. Don't do what I do. Don't make fun of them publicly. I have found that I don't have to try to keep them humble. The Lord has a way of humbling them on his own. I have this one guy, and I love him to death. He is all passion, but no practicality, right? Like he is zeal, till he hits that first obstacle and he's ready to quit. And he knows he struggles with pride. But he came to me one day and he's like, dude, I want to start a missional community, right? But we're going to focus on discipleship, and we're going to be a family on mission. And you hear that, like, that sounds cool. Here's the thing, like, literally every time we meet with our leaders, we talk about, we want to be families on mission. And he's coming to me with this statement. He's like, we're going to be a family on mission. And I hope he listens to this, so he hears me talking about it. I'm like looking at him and I'm like, okay, you're saying the things we say all the time, but you're saying this to me like it's brand new and we have no idea what we're doing. So he's describing everything he wants to do. Like, man, I'm going to get all of these guys and we're going to meet every week and we're going to like really disciple each other, which as a leader, I'm like, okay, so now you're saying that we don't actually disciple each other in our ministry. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, we're going to meet every week. I'm like, okay, who are you going to do this with? And he's talking about like 10 of my guy leaders. They're going to make one group, and they're going to really do this thing. And I'm like, okay. And I look at him and I'm like, do it. And like a couple days later, one of my staff come to me like, hey, you know they're doing this? I'm like, yeah. It's like, should we stop them? And I'm like, I don't think we can. And I'm like, this is what I think is going to happen, man. And 3 months, they're going to realize we don't actually know any lost people. And we have once a semester, we get together and we evaluate the previous semester. And sure enough, at the beginning, this happened in the fall, at the beginning of the spring, that group became 3 groups. And I would like just kind of walk around as they were doing their processing time. And I'd be like, hey, like y'all are a new group. And they're like, yeah, there were just too many chiefs and not enough, like workers, And I'm like, And then like I went to another group, like, yeah, we just like didn't actually know any lost people. And I was like, I wonder who could have seen that coming. But like, it was just something they had to walk through. So I think what I would say is when you have someone kind of prideful, just to be in proximity to that person and wait for them to fail. And then be ready to lovingly, all kidding aside, don't make fun of them, but to lovingly coach them through it, I think is kind of what you have to do.
That's good.
I mean, we've all had pride. It's not strange to us.
So we're kind of starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Maybe just one person.
Yeah.
How did you start?
Yeah. So for me, it was rebooting the leadership team. We had about 65 people in regular attendance in our ministry at that point, and it was just, hey, here's where I want to go. And if I was starting over from scratch and had one person, I would start with that one person. Like, hey, here's how I want to go. Do you think you could get behind that? I want to invest in you over the next year, so you're able to do the kind of things that I am doing, and then we can do this thing together. And where there's just me, now there's me and you. And even begin to cast that vision, like, hey, I'm going to invest in you, but like, what if next year I had 3 people and you had 3 people? And then what could that turn into, right? And I think you just have to start there. You have to invest in the folks who are with you. And like, hey, that's who you got. Like, that's a God thing. So I would definitely warn against saying like, well, if I had 12. So yeah, that's where I would start. I'm going to walk with you. You start watching what I'm doing. All right, we're a month in now. I actually want you to do something as I'm doing this. Like, hey, we're going to plan this event. I want you to do this piece of it and take it on. All right, now what did you learn? Right, and you're just moving them around the square. And at the end of a year, you'll be surprised. What's the classic saying? Like, we overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 5 years. I think probably in college ministry, it's even like we overestimate what we can do in a month and underestimate what we can do in a year. But just don't try to microwave it. Slow cook it. Yes, ma'am.
So you said you meet with your leadership team for like an hour each week.
Mm-hmm.
Is that with like the L4 leaders that you're like wanting to, that you were specifically pouring into, or like?
I wish.
So you meet with like the whole leadership team.
Yeah, and that's something we're going to change. I would say we let too many folks who were like late D1, D2 onto our leadership team last year. We're going to have to be more careful about that. So we're creating a space to help some of our D4 people grow as leaders, and then we're going to have a different space to help folks get from D1 to D3.
So you're going to kind of change leadership to be more focused on D3, D4 leaders.
That's the idea.
Okay.
We're working on that. Well, hey, tell you what, I think we're like just past time and I need to go to a collab session. So I'll hang out for a few more minutes, take a few more questions. I do want to say this. Here's my challenge. When you get home, here's what you can do. So like for your example, think about who you've got in your ministry that could be a leader and say, where are they in this process? And what's one thing I could do with them in the next week to help them take a step towards the next goal of the process? This is like not just to help us understand, this is an evaluation tool. One more thing you can do is when you're in a conversation with these people, you can walk them, and now we keep this for leaders. Like I would never teach this from stage, except in a room like this. But you can sit down with one of your potential leaders and you can say, hey, let me tell you what a D1 leader is, a D2, D3, D4, disciple. I don't often show them the L part, but hey, where do you think you are? 80% of the time they will get it right. And you can agree with them. Sometimes they'll be like, man, I'm D4. And you're like, no. I don't tell them that. And I'm like, cool, what's one thing you could do to like really live in? And then they try it and they're like, I don't actually know how to do that. And then you're like, okay, let's walk through this again. Where do you think they are? And I'm like, I think I might be D2. Now we're on the same page, right? But you can use this to help people evaluate, and they can say, okay, to go from D2 to D3, I think this is one thing I need to do this week. And you say, I'm going to hold you accountable to that. Let's meet again next week and talk about it. So think about that. I would say just sit down and label some of your potential leaders, and that'll help shape your conversation with them. Hey, thank y'all so much for your time. I appreciate you being willing to come and listen to this.